Welcome to today's USB and Pharmatech webinar, PCM Measuring Content Uniformity with PAT and RTR. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. Each registration is unique and grants the right for the individual registrant only to view this webinar. Sharing this webinar with unregistered viewers either during or after its performance violates Pharmatech Associates copyrights and is prohibited. Next. If you have not already done so, we ask that you take some time to read the Pharmatech Associates course disclaimer. You can download this presentation, including the disclaimer, from your USB education account. Please follow the instructions in your confirmation email to download the presentation. Next. We have two presenters for today's webinar. Richard Steiner, a PCM practice lead at Pharmatech Associates, Polly De Silva, technical director at USB. Presenting first today is Mr. Steiner.
Yeah, hello everyone out there. I hope you can understand me well and you can see our slides well. I also want to welcome Polly with me, and we are excited both to bring up a very important topic. We talked about continuous manufacturing for quite a while in different webinars, and so this time we want to focus on measuring content uniformity with PAT in the overall RTR scheme. And I'm going on here with a quick high-level agenda of our talk. So we will get into control strategy and PAT, how this is relating together, have a closer look to sensor technologies available today, current technical solutions on the market for content uniformity. As mentioned, content uniformity within the real-time release strategy, and then the conclusion at the end. And yeah, let's have a quick start on, for many of you, this might be not something entirely new, but just to bring us all to the same page. If we are going into talking about real-time release, PAT, quality by design, in combination to continuous manufacturing, it's important to highlight that with a continuous process, you intend to adjust the process dynamically while you process the material. Even if you have variable input, you do this to keep the output, the product, finally within the given design space and your criteria you have defined before, that you can make a real-time release afterwards. So that's basically an intrinsic idea of continuous manufacturing. Whereas with what is usually in the batch processing, you test between unit operations and to release it for the next unit operation. Here we are working one into the other unit, and we want to keep the process always delivering material in spec. Why this is important, we will elaborate on this a little bit further down our webinar. Beside equipment selection, which is, I think, an own entire complexity. But then if you say, okay, what kind of PAT do I need to bring on board for my process? You usually start with saying, okay, what is an appropriate and representative process analyzer to give me transparency on my API of my excipients I put into the process. But beside that, and I think many presentations out there are looking into this very closely and giving cases, but you hear a little bit less about the positioning of those sensors within the process. the reliability of these applications. I think we will elaborate in our webinar today also on this a bit more. Defined method of calibration, model development, of course, important facts, and considerable work necessary to make those elements happening. But we, I think, want to view in the first step what sensor technologies are on the market for continuous manufacturing today. And this is where I want to give over to Pali to give us some overview. What is the current state of PAT?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think thanks for setting up the stage to connect, emphasize how interconnected process analytical technologies and continuous manufacturing, right? So they have a complex relationship, but at the same time, they're symbiotic, because every time you hear continuous manufacturing, it means you need analytical tools to monitor processes in real time or near real time and do the process control, right? So this is where PAT becomes key. And every time, at least in my case, every time you hear PAT or PAT sensors, you always tie it to spectroscopic techniques. But we have to remember PAT is not only spectroscopic. You have both spectroscopic and non-spectroscopic. But I'll begin with spectroscopic sensors, because that are the most, I would say, most researched and implemented at this point. When it comes to spectroscopic sensors, you will find PAT tools that range across the electromagnetic spectrum, ranging from microwave, using microwave radiation, all the way up to terahertz radiation. These technologies, when you look at the principle is the light matter interaction or the radiation matter interaction, right? And you can find a wide range of applications, whether it's using them for identification or quantification, or look at and determine the particle size, right? While there are a lot of different types of spectroscopic sensors, what we hear the most are either based on near IR sensors or Raman sensors, because they have been around for quite a while, and we see them for blend uniformity testing, testing or content uniformity. So that's a brief overview of type of spectroscopic sensors. So it's not only the principle and the application. You also have to think about where we are going to position them, right? In that sense, you will see these sensors positioned for inline testing, online or at line. And at the same time, not only the positioning and the application, you also have to think about the calibration. In most cases, for near IR and other technologies, you will see chemometric model building is essential. These are, in most cases, multivariate. But in some cases, like Raman, because they are highly specific to the molecular structure, you can do direct identification. But this is a brief overview of spectroscopic techniques. But if you look at the non-spectroscopic techniques, one of the oldest non-spectroscopic sensors, let's say PATs, would be temperature and pressure sensors, right? They have been there for a while. Mm-hmm. But I have seen quite a bit of development in the emerging technology space for PAT based on emerging technology, based on imaging technologies. So these are either optical imaging technologies or using near IR or Raman for chemical imaging or digital imaging. I think these have evolved to address some of some of the challenges the industry is facing, either to increase the spatial resolution or increase the sensitivity. especially with hyperspectral imaging, you can do identification and quantification in a high throughput manner. So we are seeing more traction in researching these technologies, and I would like to mention these are not. I mean, this is not an exhaustive list, but again, the adoption or researching these different sensors, again, while there's a lot of choices, in the end it has to be fit for the purpose, right? So
this is the point I want to make. I mean, whenever I'm being on a conference or an exhibition or so, I feel every year there's a new technology coming up. And I think this is great. This is wonderful to see how the industry has progressed over the years. But also looking to the column on your table about sampling points, there's not so many which you would implement actually inline. They are either offline because it takes a while to test the product, but when it comes to continuous manufacturing, of course, it's rather critical to have the opportunity to implement an inline in a process. And so what is your take on that development front? Do you see that is some of these newer type of sensors are capable to be integrated inline?
I would say, I mean, that's a really good question, Richard. I think it has to do with the technology evolution and how we are going to integrate it to the existing manufacturing line, right? So near IR, Raman, those technologies have evolved, and their usage and utility has been researched for a while in the pharma space, right? So the technology, the analytical instrumentation has adapted in a way that it's flexible to integrate to existing unit operation. So especially with, let's say, for imaging technologies, these technologies right now either at line or in line. One of the reasons I would say the footprint of this instrumentation, if you imagine how you're gonna integrate it into the size limitations, I think that's why it's currently in the outline and inline. So probably we will see over time the technology they will get miniaturized, and we might see that technology evolution.
I mean, I mentioned already the reliability of this technology is rather critical, in particular when it comes to continuous manufacturing, because you have quite some investment into a continuous process, which you have implemented because of the process capability of this kind of technology. You build on additional complexity with PT sensors, and if they are not reliable, you basically compromise what is actually the original sense of going into continuous manufacturing. So I've put just together a table of typical applications we see today, and I want to highlight the critical quality attributes because they are basically necessary to match when it comes to real-time release testing, when it comes to the release of a product. We see that for each of these attributes, whether this is material identification, blend uniformity, moisture, so these are really typical testing sections. And we wanted to highlight in this webinar content uniformity. But beyond that, I would say only blend uniformity, moisture content. Yeah, giving my background and experience with this kind of technology, I think for these areas, you see really reliable technologies which have been implemented to a level where they are not, let's say, compromising a continuous process when it runs longer than a day. Yeah. So, and this is all kind of NIR. As you highlighted already, it seems to me that NIR technology is the most advanced and insofar the most reliable when it comes to implementations. Is this what would you say about this observation?
I think, Richard, I agree that the 2 points, NIR and NIR is the most used technology. I think the other fact is not only, the reason is not because it's only the most advanced technology. I would say the interoperability is the other factor that we have to think about. Because on a recent visit to a manufacturing facility, we heard from R&D scientists, they wanted to use a Raman probe for this specific product because that's the most suitable probe for that particular product. But the struggle they have is the unit they cannot fit the Raman instrument, Raman probe to the existing unit operation. So I think in certain cases there might be other PAT technologies that could perform better than NIR, but then you have to come up with how
Absolutely,
these two technologies are going to fit.
Yeah.
So I think that's why the state of the art is NIR, given how the unit operations, so the equipment and the instrument are designed. That I think that's one of the other factors I think would be a challenge to integrate other better performing technologies too.
I mean, you highlighted it very well. I think as we see the equipment designs are evolving in more and more integrated systems, and the space is limited for kind of additional sensors. I think that's a challenge which we want to highlight. But let's look into the content uniformity, what's going on in this specific area, as we promised on our webinar title. So here you have specific NIR technologies, and they have to be fast, of course accurate. They have to give the opportunity that you can see the product you want to monitor. But as a disadvantage, you have window falling, you have spectral resolution limitations. So if you look at this selection, what would you comment on the PAT technologies for content uniformity available today?
Yeah, so I think, Richard, even here, it depends on, what technology to choose, let's say for content uniformity. It depends on many factors, right? So it depends on the material properties or the product property, right? And the manufacturing throughput. Are you dealing with a high throughput, high volume, manufacturing process? What are the analytical requirements, right? So you have to have a good balance between at least these three factors. And again, I wanted to highlight, you have to account for the interoperability as well. Because we are talking about continuous manufacturing, we wanted to make sure the technology that we select, that's not going to interrupt the continuous process, right? It needs to be fast enough to be aligned with whether you are, manufacturing a high volume product, and whether you need a high sensitivity when it comes to ensure the quality and the consistency of the product. So that's why I think you put up three different technologies, right? Like NIR, reflectance, and you have a choice between reflectance and transmission, even for NIR, right? And then Raman. I think this is a case, I think this is a good case to elaborate how one has to decide which technology is the best for that particular application. Let's say, if you have a high volume production, you wanted to do the testing faster at the same time without compromising the accuracy, right? So in that case, NIR is a better fit than Raman. But again, to choose between reflectance and transmission, this is where you have to think about the materials properties, right? Do you have a thick sample? Do you have a translucent sample? Depending on that, you have to choose that.
And
I
the
think-
sample size, because it's also a matter of time.
Exactly.
How fast you can do this testing. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have a high volume production, large volume, it makes sense to go with the faster, the PAT technology that facilitates the faster analysis. But I would say for Raman, this is where you have to know about your product, right? There are certain, let's say, products where you know that they have a variable. You need highly sensitive analytical technologies because your sample it could be a narrow therapeutic index sample where you need a high sensitivity to analyze whether you have the right amount, the right dosage of API, or you have a product with low API dosage. In that case, it's justifiable. I think it's the most usable PAT technology. So I think like those are the factors one has to decide when you're thinking about commercially implementing PAT.
I mean, you gave a very good point to the dose level and I want to highlight what I saw over the years. So if continuous manufacturing have been implemented in most cases, it has been for new trucks, for new truck entities. And most of them are not only higher in their efficiency, but also in consequently lower in dose. So you see that the struggles are, if you have a low dose product, how to be capable to identify a low dose. And I go about 0.5 to 5% maybe. So is this technology fast enough and good enough to identify also low dose applications? I think that's another challenge on top. Yeah. Is NIR sufficient for this case? Is reflectance sufficient, or do you need transmission? So I think these are the questions which someone who has needs to put this together has in his mind and to overcome.
Yeah. And yeah, I think like that's where I think, Richard, the distinction should be between doing R&D, research to identify the best PAT tool, and then when you transition to commercial manufacturing, you have to consider a lot of other factors. And so like the most, have a balance between the practicality and the operational aspect when you select the best suitable PAT.
A rhetorical question on this point, is PAT in this case the enabler for continuous manufacturing or the other way around?
So I would say I'm an analytical chemist by training. So when I think about continuous manufacturing, as I mentioned in the beginning, when you say something, you're manufacturing something in a continuous manner, that means you need to monitor the process in real time, or at least near real time. That means you need technologies that are capable of enabling it. So from my point of view, PAT, you need PAT tools when you're establishing, when you are developing a continuous manufacturing system, right? You need PAT. PAT is it's an enabler to monitor and do the data-driven optimization. So that's where I think I would like to know your point of view. Why do you think, I mean, I'm not necessarily you, what's your take on continuous manufacturing facilitating the adoption of PAT?
I think this has also a little bit to do with whether you're doing drug substance or drug product testing. So the sentence I wrote here, the continuous manufacturing facilitates the adoption of PET tools, is also more to the oral solid dosage world, I have to confess. So of course we know, and again it goes back to the statement I made earlier. You implement continuous manufacturing for a specific reason. And this is because continuous manufacturing promises you a higher process capability. So with this, and most Conti systems, they have already embedded a lot of additional process parameters, which are maybe more indirect, or you would call it soft parameters, who give you a good control second by second of the process. So you have a very fast process. So whatever PET tool you put on, and I'm not against this, I think this is important to monitor, of course, the critical quality attributes. But what I'm asking for is when you do the selection, you need to make sure that it's reliable, fast, and accurate enough to support your process and not to compromise and hinder your process. Also, I mean, I bring back the reliability again when it comes to such a process. So imagine, and now this is Richard's chessboard, very high level, simplified process train. So you have already some complexity here. Material handling, dosing blending, or dosing mixing, however you define it. Granulation technologies, another dosing blending step usually. And then finally going to tableting and coating to the final form. So you have this material flow between. So this is one interface. There's this mechanical needs fit together as a mechanical interface that these unit operations are working together. But sometimes these intermediates or these interfaces are kind of independent processes. Let's say material flows from A to B by pneumatic conveying means or something. Yeah, so you have also a small process which helps you to get the intermediate to another level. You have the control of all of that. And then on top, now you have PET ports. So you have PET almost in between any of these unit operations. If you go it down step by step and by all the possibilities. So if you would look at this process like I do everything possible, technically visible today, I put all of this load on such a system, yeah, you might end up with additional interfaces, not only just, as you highlighted, giving the sensor space, but also supporting other elements which are then necessary. Separation and segregation of out-of-spec materials theoretically, or you want to take physical samples. So what I show here, this is just, I think, to give an idea, this is just an interface between an outlet of a blender on top and the inlet to the next unit operation. So this whole device is a machine in its own. You have level sensors involved, you have maybe also dosing means in between where you just to make sure that the material flows really constantly alongside the NIR sensor. You have physical sample taking ports, and all of this needs to be easy to clean and disassemble. So it's pretty clear just by looking at this picture that it's a device on its own. It's maybe a unit operation on its own. Is this what we really want to achieve? Actually, imagine you have this in between each of these unit operation. This will give you a sense why sometimes people say, oh, continuous manufacturing, oh, takes a long time to clean, takes a long time to take apart. I have many parts and quite some risk also in operations that some of these sensors are failing. So what I'm advocating for is saying, okay, you have to tailor make this. Of course, you have new designs today which are more lean and more, let's say, possible to adapt in a process position. But I think it is also the question, is it really all needed to all time? In development, yes, no question, because you may also support with PET development of predictive models and so forth. Yeah. But again, speaking as an engineer, you have to not just select the sensor, but when you do this, you have to have in your mind as well, where do I put the sensor in? What is the sensor? Is not just the sensor, this is also supporting functions of the sensor. The sensor has to be in a position isolated from, let's say, outside temperature, whatever effects, has to be cleaned, has to be calibrated. You have to have these sampling ports because you want to take sometimes maybe also physical samples. And then you have this out of spec material discharge. So you have to have this in mind before you just say, okay, I want to have this sensor in this location. Is it really necessary? Even ICHQ13 is elaborating on that to make sure that these locations are well selected. And as you nicely mentioned, you have this design challenge that you have a high level of integration today. So the space is getting, you know, there's a school of thoughts where you could see on earlier times the Conti rigs, they have been quite, you know, stacked up. But as also there's the promise for Conti systems to get them on a smaller footprint, easier to handle and to clean. Engineering wise, you have to get them into as tight as possible as you can together, also to make sure that there's no material buildup, there's a constant turnover of material in front of the sensor. So you have these challenges to keep in mind. And this is where my concern comes into place, selecting PET for the right position. There are nice solutions out there today. Already vendors, I think, went quite a way into this, offering more integrated systems. Just highlighting here a few. This is also not comprehensive, but it's giving everyone a taste that suppliers are working on this, mainly involving blend uniformity in their direct compression systems, but not so much content uniformity. And I think this was our topic, yeah, saying at the end, if the tablet comes out of the compression process, we want to have a content uniformity. We have to have a content uniformity check. So this is required. And we're going now back to this compendial situation. You have the 905, USP 905, well famous. I think most looking at that, where you see the definition, it's very clearly said. So what to do? You have to measure the API content and the mass related to it to define the unit dose and to release your product. Looking to this, I mean, I'm not sure what your take is on that, but looking to this and say, okay, is this also applicable to Conti processes? Question mark. What is your take on that?
I think so. That's a really, I think a really good question, Richard, because we have to remember USP 905 was historically developed for batch manufacturing, right? When we think about continuous manufacturing, certain elements do not align with the batch concept, right? So when you define a batch, the definition of a batch is very loose, right? I mean, in a continuous setup, because the definition of batch could be different, right? So I think if you're thinking about adapting or modifying USP 905, we have to think about sampling strategies, right? So this might not be a universal approach because continuous manufacturing, it could be different for different products, right? I mean, it depends on the product too, right? So I think there might be, as the industry is evolving and adapting more, adapting continuous manufacturing more, I think it might need some interpretation as to how we could define sampling strategies. I think that's where I see some modification could be done. But I would mention we have seen, I mean, with my personal interactions with our stakeholders, those who are doing continuous manufacturing, even end-to-end for oral solid dosages, they are comfortable using existing USB 905 to do the batch release, right? So I think there's that discontinuity between real-time release and content uniformity testing. I mean, that's a big topic, and I think bridging that would require a lot of effort and consensus between different stakeholders.
No problem to mention that, because I think also here it was actually the European Pharmacopoeia, I think, who expanded on the size expanded the sample size in their description for having capability for bigger batches on continuous. But let's go back to this point, because again, we wanted to highlight content uniformity testing. And indeed, I mean, earlier days, there was a device called Bruker Tandem who combined a tablet checker with an NIR, transmission NIR system. And this was, let's say, put next to a compression machine. So you could get some samples out, checked, like you would give time to check these tablets. So this was a device which has been implemented a couple of times, but I think it was also going into kind of saying, okay, we take it off the market because it was not efficient enough, and had some, again, to my reliability point, it had some hiccups and some challenges. So, but what most people are doing still in the market, as far as I see, they take it offline indeed. They do the traditional checks of with a Bruker, for example, and they say, okay, that's cool. It's enough for us. But I think, why carrying tablets over? I forgot to mention that most of these products are also a challenge because of their potency, and you have additional hurdles on containment and requests on containment more and more. Again, there are nice applications like this one here shown from Fatty. They have what they call a tablet uniformity device, which is a reflectance. And a reflectance device. It's just reflectance, you would say, but yeah, if you have a blend uniformity measurement, if you have your online PET tools, like I would define a loss and weight feeder, so you have actually everything necessary to say, is this the right, is the product right? It's not maybe, or yeah, maybe for some low dose, it might be a topic, but technically, I think visible to say, okay, what is in this tablet is clear, and it should be, and it is fast too. Yeah, so that's a nice solution, which I would say it's also positioned well, integrated well. Do you have offline devices, but you could put them in line as well, like the one from Pharma Technology shown here. I did a little survey, as you can see, just to check the market, what's out there. I mean, that's a fascinating device as well, where you measure the thickness, the length, so the measure of the tablet with a laser. You have this NIR, a spatial resolve spectroscopy, who gives you deeper information of the tablet and more surface covering. And this is fast enough, microwave for the mass testing. So this is fast enough to make, what, 120,000 tablets. So you can put it theoretically into inline testing mode. But yeah, as you can see, that's an additional equipment as big as a compression machine itself. So before you implement such a technology in a commercial setting, you should have a good reason there. Also money-wise, I think these devices, and this is the latest I saw from Optimal, came out a few months ago. this is a robot, basically takes a tablet on the weighing balance, and then from the weighing balance to the Bruker NIR transmission. So basically a little bit the replacement of the Bruker tandem, if you will, more sophisticated, but it's an additional machine with additional complexity, which I think you need to avoid for commercial settings. We want to make things simpler, rather than more complex, and that's one of the paradigms of continuous manufacturing. You also can have this one from Bruker, Kramer, sorry. It's also transmission. It's an IPC check, which can be integrated. So yeah, just in a nutshell, I put a little table together with all these things visible for me. It's nice and cool to have, but the question is, it's also some, beside the complexity, and we talk a lot about business case for continuous manufacturing, it also adds up costs, investments for these kind of technologies, because this is not just a simple implementation here. It's putting another substantial amount of money into your budget. Looking to the containment capabilities, which I think back to the link of low dose, but usually high potent products, it's a challenge as more of these new products on the market falling under this category. And then even OEB3 or so is not sufficient. So there are systems out there which operate in OEB4 or 5 level even. So yeah, what other choice does such a company have rather than taking then physical samples manually, bring them offline for testing? Is this the way? You have a 10 whatever, or 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 million equipment, but which is highly automated, where you put all the bells and whistles in, and then on the back end you do a manual testing? Question mark. I'm curious, what is your view on that?
Yeah, I think, Richard, it's where you have to very thorough risk assessment. Like, one has to do a very thorough risk assessment and balance out, have a good business case. Do we really need these technologies, right? I mean, there might be cases where you can justify doing 100% testing or integrating. I'm not advocating for 100%, but like some of these big footprint equipment might be justifiable for certain products. But I think you might touch upon on this later, but I think it has to do with compliance with the regulatory requirements too, right? If there's clarity around whether one has to do the real-time testing, real-time release testing or not, I think that's another factor we have to weigh out too.
Yeah. And I think what is to my taste also forgotten a lot, and this is why I bring this slide up. I always say there are already a lot of sensors on board of each of these systems, where you basically you measure the force of tablet by tablet anyway. So you have 100% testing, kind of an indirect testing. So it makes, of course, sense to say whatever you implement inline should be capable to support these. But I think there's another way of looking into that. Say, can you build predictive models based on your PAT analytics, and then run those systems in a commercial space with predictive models? And because, again, if bringing back my complexity point, if you see today's systems, you have usually SCADA systems who operate these unit operations like a conductor. Then on top you have these PET sensors to all of the before shown process parameters. It's a massive amount of data, not only, but also to handle this data into a way it should be for real-time release testing is a technical challenge, and gives, of course, opportunities like this picture is showing here from Siemens about their CyPAT product. So you have to see the complex equipment is just on one picture here on the left side, but what is behind that as a data transfer, as data exchange, analytics, chemometric models, etc. So I'm always a bit afraid saying, do we not create a kind of a fatigue with putting all of this complexity on a system which actually purpose was to make things easier and simpler? And what are possibilities like predictive models now? And ICHQ13, by the way, is giving the opportunities here, saying process models can be used for development of Conti processes or as part of the control strategy for commercial production, including the diversion strategy. So I think this is now a little bit where I see the way out, saying you can use these predictive models, and this has been shown and showcased several times that they are really reliable. Of course, you have to develop them, and maybe this is where you use PAT in your development stage. But when it comes to commercial release processes, I think predictive models are a good way to give systems back their reliability to operate. And yeah, this is just a case I always love to refer to. Once shown on a 120-hour, 15 million tablets process, where a predictive model developed before implemented basically ran this process and was so precise to predict content uniformity when it was out of spec and divert products. Yeah. So here you basically use content uniformity measure at line to check the model rather than to release the product. Yeah. So what is your take on this kind of way out of the complexity issue?
I think, yeah, I think I emphasized this one in the beginning too, Richard. So it's a distinction between going from development stage to commercialization, commercial manufacturing state. So I think that's where I think we should emphasize, we should emphasize more on the predictive model to the points that you emphasize, right? We are not going to overload the actual manufacturing control, system control, because you are dealing with you have to have automation for, sampling and the sampling frequency. So the less complexity that you can add by integrating more testing is the more reliable more reliable and more strategic way to use PAT in a commercial setting. So I think I see more and more cases where the industry is going towards developing predictive model and soft sensors and apply it in the manufacturing setting, like the commercial manufacturing setting.
Yeah, I think I refer recently in most of my presentations to the ICHQ13, and you see, okay, conventional offline testing is necessary, of course, for all kind of quality attributes where no analytic technology is available. I mean, this makes also sense. So if we do not have something in line, which is capable to measure potency or measure content uniformity, of course, there is no way out for checking this at line. I think as we have progressed quite in our time, just at the end from this section about real-time release testing and RTR, formerly parametric release testing called, it's maybe important that the EMA guide, to highlight the EMA guideline, sorry, which gives also some good visibility in the thinking of regulators here. And there's, I think, even highlighted could be replaced at end product testing. Like I found this sentence interesting. Spectral data monitored online controlling content of active substances, water content, plant uniformity, and film thickness properties could be thereby replaced by end product testing like uniformity of content, tablet strengths, and drug dissolution. When real-time release testing is applied, the attribute that is indirectly controlled, content uniformity again, together with a reference to the associated test procedure, should still be included in the specification. The relation between end product testing and material attributes and process monitoring, including acceptance, should be fully explained and justified, including the use of any prediction models. So you see, that's the final end of the sentence. The prediction models have been also basically put into the space, saying you can use predictive models. Of course, you have to justify, you have to showcase that this works properly, but it's possible to do so. And I think that's maybe really a nice way to think about it before you overload your system with online analytics, if you can. Any take on this for you? Or because I think my point is always, we know that this technology is capable, this continuous, and I go back to my sentence saying there's a reason and a purpose why we do that, because it's has a higher process capability. This is why the whole industry is talking since decades now about continuous processing. So we should not compromise this capability of a process. And if we know already, and this goes back to the question, do we need 100% testing? Question mark. If you have a Six Sigma process, and we have proven this many times now, and early adapters are supporting this, so you have a really little chance of error, of mistakes, and you should, I think you should take your sample size decision based on this process capability index rather than looking in 100% testing. This is what I would basically suggest. Yeah. As an example, we also do kind of, you can calculate your operating characteristic curve, which might look different for continuous process and for batch process. So with this, you can basically nicely define what is really necessary as a sample size for process with a very specific process capability. I think this process capability index is hardly used in this industry, but in others. And I think that might be a way out of saying, okay, if we can showcase that the process capability is higher, maybe consequently also the sample size we take should be less rather than going for 100% testing. I'm not sure what is your comment on that, but it's just a thought of mine which I wanted to bring into this discussion.
Yeah, I think you made that point very clear, Richard, that if you build the continuous manufacturing along with QBD to have less variability. So if you know your product is stable, 100% might be overkill. But I think there could be some exceptions where, in cases, your product, if you know that it has a non-uniformity, maybe that's a place you can justify more frequent sampling, right? More frequent sampling, and if you know the process is unstable. So that's where the risk assessment could justify, increased frequency of sampling and testing. I just want to put that out there.
I mean, okay, I want to conclude basically with someone on our last continuous manufacturing conference. He pounded out a nice sentence. There is an irony, much higher transparency showing the control of the process So this is a company who was one of the early adopters of this technology, and they have adapted to the full scale whatever was possible and available at this time. Yeah. So they basically say, we found out that this is a Six Sigma process, which was the original idea of why you have a continuous process in place. So if they would have been confident at the beginning that it is really true, they might have even put forward a different control strategy for their product filing. But now they are kind of, as this product is out, there's no way back, basically. You have to live with this complexity. And so that's exactly the trap I want to avoid for others going into this technology. Of course, you have all these capabilities and the technology on hand, but be careful by not putting too much on it. And consequently, you will find out, say, oh, I have a continuous process. Yes, this is why, this was all the purpose. So I think that that's kind of an outro I want to give to everyone out there listening to Pali's and my talk now about, yes, there are opportunities, but be cautious and mindful implementing this technology. Not to compromise your original idea why you have a continuous manufacturing implemented in the first place. And with this, I think we conclude, Pali and I, and we are interested in your questions. Many thanks for listening to us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steiner and Dr. Da Silva. Now we are going to start the Q&A.
Okay. Maybe Pali, you can take the first one.
Yeah, I think I see two related questions around 905. I think this is a question that many of my USP colleagues have received. I would say, I mean, we might need different interpretations of 905 when it comes to continuous manufacturing. As I mentioned, that's something we need collaborative, we need a lot of input from industry as well. What I could think is the factors to consider could be, as I mentioned, maybe different because the definition of batch does not exist anymore in a CM, CM scenario. So probably we could take into consideration of what are the representative sampling strategies and sampling. It could be at what interval, like what frequencies, we might need to collect data. But again, this depends on different product categories, right? So depend on not the product type, but the product category. So this is where we need a lot of collaborations and input from industry. So I think that would be a main factor. And then the other one would be probably around method development and validation for real-time testing. I think those are the factors that I can personally think of to consider. And at the same time, I think I wanted to mention, Richard, we talked about the developing models, right? So I know USP is currently working on putting some guidance around it. I think that would help with the 905, any future revisions. But I think those are the factors that I could think of. But I would like to put the question back to the audience and our stakeholders. We need your input as to what your thoughts on this as well.
I think it's a good point, and I think this is the next the other point question here. about dissolution testing. Yeah, but we have not talked about two other critical quality attributes. This is usually dissolution and then appearance coating. Yeah, so where you have just little to even no possibility to do this inline. But I saw recently a lot of publications about predictive models for dissolution testing, which have been accepted. And I also saw recently an appearance tool which has been tested, which looked promising to me. I think we will see more opportunities here as well to answer the last question of this panel. And then going from batch to continuous adapting chapter, how do we get to consensus? I think, yeah, Pali, you nicely highlighted this already. I think consensus means we need input from those who are who use this technology in practice, also to get their feedback, because I think it goes back to the assurance that we have the process capability, and then defining such an operational curve I showed to really showcase this on the particular product and process to define the sample size necessary. And then there was a question, now it's going fast here. I think there was also a question about this data storage. Of course, the data storage, I can't give you a number for this because as you saw this, how complex this setup could be. This highly depends on how many analyzers you have in place. But there are tools like SciPAT or CentiQ who are capable to deal with this. I think it's not a question of we have with today software and hardware technology. We have the capabilities to manage this data volume, but it has to be also analyzed fast enough to be capable to feed back to the process. Yeah, this is also something which we haven't talked about. It's not just having a fast sensor. You have to have a fast data analytics and an even faster transfer of the outcome to adjust a fast continuous process. Yeah, so I think that's something to look into, what is feasible for the product and what is feasible at this time from the technical solution.